don't know what's happening. Oh, there it goes. Hold on.
You can just minimize all that. You're live.
Can I go here? What do I do?
I don't know why you're so confused. So just go back to here.
All right. Am I live? Okay. Finally. Good heavens. Welcome. Good morning. Sorry we're a few minutes late here. I'm Dr. Pucci, your host of the Root Cause Solution radio show. It's another Saturday morning, and glad to be here with you. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording later in the Facebook group. I apologize up front. We're having some construction done behind me in the kitchen. And so if there's some background noise, that's what that is. I think what we're going to do is the format's going to be just a slightly different today. Cynthia is right here. So she already has a couple of questions that have been coming in. And there might be a little bit more of a conversation between us. So just, but let's get going. So what's happening?
Sure. So, one of the questions we've seen sort of the change in how people are perceiving the coronavirus, right? So one of the questions is, aren't vaccines toxic? Isn't that the root of a lot of illness?
So if you could hear that, there's been a lot of questions regarding the vaccine, about the coronavirus. Obviously, we're hearing a lot about these new variants. Now it's the Delta variant. But the question again is about, aren't vaccines toxic? Is that what it was, the question?
Basically, aren't vaccines toxic?
Aren't vaccines, is it, right, by getting that question correct, aren't vaccines toxic? And isn't that why so many people are getting sick?
Not sick from coronavirus, sick. No, chronically ill.
They're becoming chronically, the question is, are they becoming chronically ill because of the toxicity of the vaccine? Prior vaccines. Yeah, let me see if I can answer this question more succinctly, right? I have personally been, a few people have been asking me some questions about why my viewpoint on getting this vaccination, why I chose to get the vaccination, which I think I've made clear prior to this. But I am not an advocate of vaccinations. I am a natural healthcare provider. I do not support getting yearly flu shots or shingles shots or any of those things. I don't support the young children's vaccination schedules. So when people ask me about should they get the flu shot yearly, and my answer would always be, I would say, my strongest suggestion, no. And I would give them the reasons, right? Because in those traditional flu shots, it's that the question always, what is in there? I get it, right? They are toxic, right? They are toxic. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, right? I mean, they used to use mercury. They say they don't use mercury, but who knows, right? They put aluminum, they put a lot of junk in there, which are considered preservatives, for the vaccine. But let me just, if I can get a little bit on this subject, okay, is, what we're talking about here is a little bit different, right? When we make clarification. And just jump in, Cynthia, with some questions or some comments if you want me on the right thing, okay? When I chose to go for the vaccine back in May, I went and I had to stand on a line. It was 45 minutes. And then at some point, someone came out and was saying that anyone who was in line getting the first vaccination, which I was, the only vaccine that was available was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I chose not to get it. I walked away. And I said, I'll have to just, get on a list and try to come back again when the Pfizer or the Moderna was available. I did not want to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccination for COVID. Why? Because that is still the old familiar style of the vaccination, right? They are giving you an attenuated virus in there and other preservatives and stuff that I did not want to be injecting into my body. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccination is a new type of vaccination in the sense that, again, let me step back and clarify. People say, oh, is it new? We don't know what's going on. No, the technology for this vaccination has been around for over a decade, right? What's coming to fruition is how they can get the messenger RNA inside your cells to give the instructions so that you can produce the antibodies, right? So what is basically in this vaccination is saline with the messenger RNA that is encased in what is called with nanotechnology, which is basically a liposome. Okay, so even in the healthcare model, in the functional world, in nutrition and supplementation, in our own office, right, we have a lot of nutritional products that are in a nanotechnology delivery system, or what we call liposomal delivery. So we have glutathione, which is the body's most important antioxidant in a liposomal delivery. What does that actually mean? A liposome is basically a fat. It's a fatty acid that is the same fatty acids that makes up the membrane of your cells. And so they take this fatty acid and they encase the glutathione with the fatty acid. So you're taking it sublingually under the tongue. It goes right into circulation, is moved through circulation, and then the fatty acids, it can bind right into the fatty acids of your cell because it's basically the same fat, and it's able to deliver the glutathione directly inside your cell where it is needed inside your cell. Now, glutathione is really important. So before this technology, the only way you can get glutathione was through an IV or through nebulizers, right? So when in the supplement industry, they learned quickly that if they put it into a capsule form, it was virtually just not absorbable in a capsule form, right? Then they followed a few more years and they started getting into creams and you rub the creams of glutathione on. But still, you couldn't get the dosaging through that delivery system in an adequate level that had any real any impact, right? So it's about 10 years ago that this new technology called the nanotechnology is on the scenes, right? And it's in the healthcare industry. And so now you have this liposomal delivery. So when you take a liposomal delivery under the tongue, I mean, virtually you're getting basically the same concentration as if you were doing it through an IV drip. That's pretty incredible. That's pretty powerful, right? And so they're taking this technology now even into this vaccination, right? So what it is that they are using this technology. So the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine is a world apart from the old familiar vaccines that we were talking about, right? Now that even going further, as far as vaccinations, again, being toxic and stuff. Again, as I said, I have not advocated taking vaccinations. I do not get a flu shot on a yearly basis. I do not get a shingle shot, right? I don't take antibiotics, right? I don't do any of these things, right? But there's a lot of other things that are at stake here, right? Um, what we're really knowing now as we get further into genetic testing, not genetic testing for disease, but we call epigenetic testing, which has really only been around since 2003, because from 1990 to 2003 was what was called the Human Genome Project. If I can get into this a little bit, yeah, it was the Human Genome Project. It was a 13-year study globally, and the idea was to map out the human genes. And the idea was to map out the human genes so we can figure out what genes were causing what disease, and we can go in there and then slice that gene out and splice in a new gene, and we would cure disease. It was a novel idea. What they really began to realize at the end of the 13-year study, that basically everything that we would thought and believed and were teaching in medical schools is really wrong, right? So they knew going into this project that a human being is made up of over 100,000 proteins. Therefore, there has to be at least 100,000 genes to program the production of these proteins. We just got to map them out. At the end of the 13 years, they said we can only discover, I think, don't quote me, like 26,000 genes. There's a lot of scratching heads. Like, how could this be? We don't really carry any more genes than a mouse, believe it or not. We only have about 10,000 more genes than a banana, right? But the truth is, it's like the question is, how is it as human beings we can be so much more complex than mice if we're carrying virtually the same number of genes? And so it spun everything upside down because it used to be thought that your genes were fixed. It was your destiny, right? If there's cancer in your family, you were going to get cancer. If there's cardiovascular disease in your family, you're going to get cancer. If there's depression in your family, your destiny is to get depression. Tough luck. We now know that only about 5 to maybe 10% of your genes are fixed, meaning I cannot wake up tomorrow and be a different color or a different height. Those replications, those proteins are going to be the same. They're programmed. But about 90 to 95% of my genes are influenced by my environment. And that's known as epigenetics. And what we express, we call it phenotypic expressions, right? What do we manifest in our health or disease models, in our weight, right? In our overall conditioning, do we manifest, for example, do our genes promote more testosterone dominance, and so our body phenotypically looks more muscular, or do we genetically predominate with more estrogen dominance, and therefore our body phenotypically looks more estrogen, we carry more weight, more fat in certain areas. These are what you call your phenotypic expressions, which are influenced by your genes, which are influenced by your environment. Now this is pretty cool, right? right? Because we're not really finding specific genes. I mean, there are genes, for example, for let's say Alzheimer's, but just because a person has the APOE4 gene doesn't mean they're going to get Alzheimer's, right? What we have to look at, the science is now looking at all the other factors, right? These lifestyle and factors and stuff. So let's go back to, again, bringing it full circle back to the vaccination. And I get the concern that vaccinations can be toxic, but there is a lot of toxins in the world, right? We're exposed to toxins day in and day out. It's not a question whether you're toxic, if the whole world is toxic, it's how toxic are you? So yeah, we don't want to be just running down every single year getting a flu shot or shingle shots, in this manner, right? But we're talking about a different technology here in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccination. So again, it begs the question, and my job here as a healthcare provider is to bring forward information. I'm not telling anyone listening what to do. I'm just trying to provide clarity and information to the questions. Ultimately, each individual person has to make up their own mind. However, right, there's a lot of information out there, right? And you always got to say, where are you getting the information from? And who are you listening to? Or what social media channels are we listening to that keeps reporting certain things over and over and over again? I'm on these things. I see it, right?
But where do you get your information? Maybe talk about what you do every morning and where you go.
So what I do every morning, right, is I spend 2 hours every morning studying. Okay, I study immunology, I study neurology, and I'm staying abreast of all the research and technology that's coming along. And I belong to programs, and I'm getting my resources from scientific journals, okay, into having these discussions with other peers that are pretty well astute in the world of immunology, right? And so, I'm not going to give the person's name. I'm not going to give the name of the company, right? But I can tell you a very preeminent immunologist that is very well respected, okay, especially in the world of functional medicine, because one of the labs that this gentleman is involved with is one of the labs that the majority of anybody who's doing functional medicine is going to use, okay, especially if they're doing anything immune based, okay. And this gentleman a year ago became infected with COVID. This immunologist, this pristine immunologist, became infected with COVID and wound up in the hospital, okay, and was going to get put on a ventilator. His life was at stake, and thankfully he pulled out, right? He pulled out, right? And now he's back working with a company that I use myself when we are running tests for myself, which I do, and for patients. No, so nobody. So this is a virus that it's like, especially now with the new Delta variant. I mean, this new variant is more aggressive than the original virus. It's spreading more aggressively. That's why here in the East Coast, in the tri-state area, it is now there are more cases up and on the rise, right? And now we're back facing mandates of maybe going back to masks and kids being forced to wear masks. And I just saw on the news this morning, now they're really considering canceling all high school sports this coming fall. This is the world that we're living in, right? Because this Delta variant is spreading rapidly, and it's spreading predominantly to people that are unvaccinated. That's what's happening, right? So again, it comes back down to the discussion of risk versus reward, right? I chose to get it myself because I really evaluated the risk versus the reward. Is there a risk in getting the vaccination? Of course, there's a risk in getting the vaccination. There's a risk doing anything. I don't mean to be facetious. Get in my car, get out to the grocery store. There's a risk that I'm going to have an accident, right? I mean, I get it. There's a risk, but we kind of play by some rules here, right? Because we have yellow lines in roads, and I can stand on one side, another car can stand on another side, and I obey the stop signs, and I obey the lights, and I stop, let other cars go, and we can all kind of get along, and that ensure me that I have a better risk of getting to the food store more successfully. If we didn't have that, it would be complete chaos, and the risk of having an accident would greatly rise, right? So we have to kind of look at the whole picture here. But from a personal standpoint, right, is people keep talking about what is the risk, the risk of the getting the vaccination, but we've stopped talking about the risk if you actually get the infection, if you get the virus, and tell me that you're going to be exposed to it. That you just it's everywhere. You're going to be exposed to it. They're going to be exposed to it. So now the risk is what happens if you get the virus, right? And we know for a lot of people, it's not a good outcome, right? And as I've been saying to you in past Facebooks, right, is we're having something now which is called long haul syndromes. So we're having many people, I see it every day, who've been infected, right? And the severity of the symptom doesn't even correlate to the degree of the long haul. So what's happening to these people is months after they have recovered from the actual COVID infection, is now they're having a lot of ongoing unwanted symptoms, from chronic coughs, to being chronically fatigued, to migraine type headaches, to just to chronic digestive problems. I mean, just really affecting the quality of their lives post COVID infection. Right. So we have to kind of weigh these things out. As I said to you, I think in the last week's seminar, right, is we live with viruses in us. We have viruses in us. We have types of viruses that we call latent viruses or dormant viruses. So herpes is an example, right? When people get under a lot of stress and the immune system kind of gets weakened, fatigues, that virus can rear its head and you stop breaking out in fever sores and other things. Those are herpes simplexes, right? But another form of that is Epstein-Barr virus. So we know that about maybe 90% of the population has Epstein-Barr virus in them. But when your immune system is doing a good job navigating and controlling things, it keeps it in a dormant state and we're fine. But what we're finding is that when people are becoming infected with COVID, right, is that the immune system, in its struggle to manage the COVID virus, okay, is losing control elsewhere, and it's allowing the Epstein-Barr virus now to wake up. And we're kind of becoming now infected or reinfected with the Epstein-Barr virus, right, which has been associated with mono, right? So we get mono-like symptoms. So risk versus reward. You got to take into consideration a lot of things like age, right? What's the age? You can't, people making decisions who are, 15 years old compared to somebody's making a decision when they're 65 years old, right? And I know there was a question last week. I think I tried to talk about it. Some of the differences between, what suppression of immune system or immune compromise. And you hear a lot of confusion with people who say that they have an autoimmune. They know they have an underlying autoimmune condition, let's say Hashimoto's thyroid, so they think of themselves as a immune suppressed person and maybe they shouldn't get the vaccine. So let me just share just a little bit of clarity on that. Okay. There's a difference between, you would say, immune suppression and immune compromise, right? So again, as I pointed out in the last few weeks, when we talk about these commercials on TV, that every other commercial is a commercial for a drug, right? It doesn't make a difference if it's rheumatoid, if it's diabetes, if it's depression, if it's psoriatic arthritis, if it's gastric problems, right? And every commercial, when you hear the drugs, they always say, tell your doctor if you get a yeast infection, if you get sores, if you get TB, if you get a cough, if you get fungal infections. And the reason why they're saying that is because every one of these drugs to treat these conditions is an immune suppressing drug. So if you suppress your immune system, right, you lose some of the surveillance, right, to fight off infections. So here we are talking about on TV commercial, selling these drugs for these problems, which is suppressing your immune system. How are you supposed to fight a coronavirus if you have a suppressed immune system, right? The immune suppressing drugs typically are used, for organ transplants. Right? When you have an organ transplant, it's very likely that your immune system is going to see that organ, that transplanted organ, as something foreign and want to attack it and reject that organ. Right. So what doctors do in organ transplantation is they put people on immune suppressing drugs to shut it down so it doesn't reject that organ and give the body a chance for the organ to kick into gear, right? That same concept is taken into the world of disease model, right, where they're putting people on immune suppressing drugs, especially in the world of autoimmunity. So people go for autoimmunity, whether it's rheumatoid or psoriatic arthritis, lupus, ulcerative colitis, all these things. I mean, for the most part, in the medical model, the treatment is an immune suppressing drug, right? So it's trying to shut down, in principle, the idea that the immune system is attacking self-tissue, but it's also shutting down the immune system's ability to fight infections. So, maybe in the short term, some benefit, but a long term, pretty detrimental. Immune compromised means really that your immune system is just not working at its best. Okay, and there's many things that cause the immune system to be compromised, right? So age is a factor, right? The older we get, again, the older we get, right, what begins to happen is that inside your cells, we talked about the mitochondria. The mitochondria is where we make energy, right? And so we do lose some of the mitochondria as we age with each decade, right? But let me back up. Let me explain this to you, right? Because there's a concept, right, there's what we call chronological aging, And chronological aging is, is our birth dates, right? This date we turn 20, and this date we turn 40, and then this date we have a birthday we turn 50. That's your chronological age. And now we look at things which we call your biological age or your physiological age. And that's really how your body at a cellular level is aging. And we can test that through cardiovascular means, your cardiovascular output, your volume of output is an indication of how you age. Right? So a person could be 40 years old, but at a cellular level, they're actually maybe more like a 70-year-old person. They're aging prematurely. Or a person could be 50 and they could biologically be aging like a 40-year-old. That's terrific. So now that's a new concept, right? And so it's cellular aging, and that's really based upon the health and the function of your mitochondria. So this aging principle is really the, how is your mitochondria aging, right? And so the mitochondria inside your cell is where you make energy. So if we're compromising the function of the mitochondria, and your mitochondria does not putting out as much energy as it could, your immune system, right, has mitochondria. That's how your immune cells have to have energy to function. So we have poor functioning mitochondria, things that are compromising mitochondria, right? Then you're going to not have a robust functioning immune system. It's more compromised. Like, in our practice, when I run routine blood tests, of course, right? And one of the things you run is called the CBC, a complete blood count. And one of the things you see in a complete blood count is white blood cells. A white blood cell is the immune system cells, right? It's the general name for, it's called leukocytes. It just represents the immune system. And then we differentiate those white blood cells into subtypes called neutrophils and lymphocytes, eosinophils and basophils. And when I assess that, you look at those things, the ratios of neutrophils to lymphocytes mean certain things. It kind of says that the person may be dealing with a bacterial infection or a viral infection and different things of that nature. But that aside, when you look at the white blood cell count, right, we want to see it in what we call a healthy range, right? Obviously, the white blood cells go up. Maybe the immune system is fighting something which would be appropriate. But I would say probably in 80% of the blood tests that I see personally, we see low white blood cell count. Low. What does that mean? That means that immune system is is compromised. That immune system is tired. That immune system is tired. It's having a hard time fighting things, right? So let's take coronavirus out of the equation, right? When you have a tired immune system, right, it's going to make you more susceptible to other kinds of infections, right, that we're exposed to all the time. But even internally, right, is we have a lot of bacteria that live in us. We have yeast and things that live in us, right? So when you have a tired immune system, you can't control that. And so people who have a compromised immune system are much more susceptible to getting bacterial overgrowth in their bodies, things like SIBO, as an example. It's very common for people with compromised immune system to have an overgrowth and have ongoing yeast infections, right? Because their immune system is compromised. So again, yeah, if I can bring us full circle a little bit.
Yeah, maybe you could just touch on how do antibodies develop against the mitochondria?
How do how do how do how do
Antibodies.
antibodies develop against the mitochondria? Okay, um, so
Just
let's,
curious because I know
huh? Yeah, we did talk about that. One thing I mentioned to you, I guess we were going to talk last week, and I did mention this week, is that one of the things that we are seeing post-COVID infection, not from vaccination. Let me clear, not from the vaccination, but from the people that have been infected by COVID. Right, we're seeing a lot of it. We're seeing a huge increase in autoimmunity triggered by the infection of COVID, not from the vaccine. I have mentioned to you guys in the past, but it's worth repeating. What we understand, what we're observing, this is not me, this is in the literature, the studies, right? These journals, immunological journals, they're showing that apparently when the immune system is developing antibodies, right? We want to run the IgG antibodies. Many of you are familiar with that, right? So you run an IgG antibody in a blood test for coronavirus. It lets you know if you had the infection, right? Cool. So we have the IgG antibodies. These antibodies, when they're being made by the immune system, okay, they're made in specific cells called plasma cells, right? And they're made inside what is called a germinal center of the plasma cell. What they're seeing is when the immune system is making antibodies from when you're infected with the COVID, those antibodies are not being made in the germinal center. They're being made outside the germinal center. which is unusual. But when that happens, it seems like these antibodies can cross-react more readily with self-tissue. Meaning, so if you get infected with the coronavirus and your immune system is producing antibodies against the coronavirus, it can also produce antibodies against your thyroid, against your joints, against your cells, even against the mitochondria of your cells. Any tissue in your body that's protein is up for grabs. Okay, so right, but when you're making antibodies intentionally because of the vaccination, those antibodies seemingly are being made inside the plasma cell. That's a big difference. And so what's happening is that there is less cross-reaction with that antibody against self-tissue. So in a way, by choosing the vaccination, this particular type of vaccination, not the Johnson & Johnson, but the messenger RNA vaccination, is you're protecting yourself against probable autoimmunity. Okay, so that's something to to think about. Okay, what else? Yeah, other questions that's coming in that you want to talk about? I'm sure you can have questions for me. Let me just say one other thing, because I just remember, right? People who have autoimmunity. Okay, now I'm on Facebook. I'm not one-on-one with the individual, but again, mhm. People are commenting they're concerned about getting the vaccination because they have an autoimmune problem, let's say Hashimoto's thyroid, and they're saying that they are immune compromised. No, well, that's not what I mean, but that's not what the case is. Just because you have a diagnosis of autoimmunity does not mean that you're immune compromised. Okay, all I'm saying is that there are different phases, right? If a person knowingly has an autoimmune diagnosis, has an autoimmune condition, right? Depending upon what they're doing, who they're working, what kind of a doctor they're working with, right? If you're in a medical model, you're going to be on an immune suppressing drug. So I'd explain to you what the consequences of that are long term. If you're working with someone like myself, a functional doctor, right, we're trying to understand what's at the root cause, right? Root cause radio show. What's at the root cause of driving that autoimmunity, and how do we calm that autoimmunity down, put it into remission so you can move on in a nice, healthy way, right? So we're not compromising the immune system there, right? But if a person has an immune system, has an autoimmune condition, and it is turned on, it's actively turned on. That means that the immune system is driving a lot of inflammation and it's driving a lot of destruction, right? If it was rheumatoid arthritis, you would start to see more destruction in the joints aggressively. Right? If it happened to be thyroid and it was going on aggressively, right, you would start to see a lot of the hormone levels going way up in the blood very, very, very quickly. Right? That happened to my mother. My mother woke up one day and was called the thyroid storm. Okay, her autoimmunity was attacking her thyroid so aggressively that it was spilling all these active T3s into her blood at a level the body couldn't process, and that was causing her heart to race so fast that she could have died of a heart attack. So she had to immediately go into the hospital and have her thyroid gland radiated. That's a thyroid storm. If a person is in an active, turned on autoimmune response where the body is driving lots and lots and lots of inflammation, then I would suggest, my opinion would be that you would then consider not getting the vaccination at that point until you got that autoimmunity under control. I hope that answered that question more clearly. Okay, I think we've done a pretty good job on that. Again, once again, I hope this has been helpful. We do have a webinar coming up a week from Thursday, right? The 26th at 7 p.m. Thursday, the 26th, the webinar. We'll be going a little bit more with some diagrams and some graphs, kind of getting into autoimmunity a bit and the association. So hopefully you'll join us for that, and we'll see you again next week. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.